And so, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We have Dr. Chris Reid here. I had the privilege of working with Dr. Reid at the Sail Grand Prix in San Francisco, and he is honestly probably one of the best leaders that I've worked under. He's very humble and he's very kind and he's a great teacher. And so I feel very fortunate that he's willing to talk to us today. He also has some background in the military. I know that we reached out to the military interest group to see if they were interested in joining as well. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask him. Also, do you feel comfortable with people just interjecting if they have questions? It seems like we have a pretty small group, so it should be pretty easy to be
Yeah,
sociable.
let's keep this informal. Interrupt any question, happily take. If you wanted me to go over something, let's do that. So yeah, no problem.
Awesome. And then I'll be monitoring the chat. So if anybody wants to send anything into the chat, I'll be monitoring that. And yeah, once again, just thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Okay, well, hey, look, thank you, Matthew, and thank you everybody for joining me. It's 7 o'clock in the evening in the UK in Cornwall, which is where I'm dialing in from. Um, what I thought I'd do is talk to you fundamentally about these guys, which is Sail GP, Sail Grand Prix, which I had the pleasure of being the global safety officer, which is where Matthew and I met, looking after the safety and the design and all the features that go into these boats that do 50 knots, which is about 80 kilometers an hour. So they're like the Formula One of the water, and therefore come with huge amounts of risk. So I'll give you a little bit about my background. So yeah, here we go. How did I end up chasing boats? Talk to you a little bit about New Zealand, where I've been for the last 16 years. And I think I'll go straight in with some, I always think it's important to ask people, what did you learn? What would you pass on to your colleagues? And I would say, being in the right place at the right time helps. So that's and if you get the opportunity to do something, you've got to say yes. It's we all get the opportunity to do some really cool things, but sometimes we hesitate. We've got commitments, etc. And sometimes you just have to go and say yes. Back yourself, know your limits, and know the rules. But basically, back yourself. If you want to do it, do it. Someone's got to do it. If it's not you, it'll be someone else. But at the same time, always ask for help. Never be shy. I ask for help all the time. I think I asked Matthew for lots of ideas when we were working together. And if always ask. Um, so home for me originally was the UK. I trained in Newcastle, and I think some of you may have heard I did an elective at University of Virginia in Charlottesville, not far from you guys. I had a fantastic time there, wonderful experience doing trauma and orthopedics. Could have happily stayed actually. Um, and Anyway, I finished my medical training and I joined the Navy. I joined the Royal Marines, and I worked with the British Special Forces, Special Boat Service, Special Air Service, and I think a certain organisation called SEAL Team 6, which was very cloak and dagger in those days, but we all know about it now. So I did used to fly over to Virginia Beach, I think it was, yeah, and I did had some trips in DC. I had a fantastic time. So that was, and then I moved. I was a GP in primary care, and I moved over to New Zealand, where I worked in rural New Zealand for 16 years. In which is general practice. There's a if you say I don't want to see someone unless a tree falls on them, you can guarantee a tree will fall on them, and you'll deal with some trauma. So, and that's New Zealand's got a very rich history for sailing in the America's Cup. Um, if you don't know what the America's Cup is, but the America's Cup obviously is been prestigiously held by the New York Yacht Club for more than I think about 170 years. They stole it off the British, and the British have never won it back, and hence it was renamed the America's Cup. And this beautiful trophy sat in New York Yacht Club for many years until people like the new Kiwis came and stole it off them. And of course, they've just won it again, New Zealand. It's been some fun times in New Zealand. So I got involved in the safety because they were having problems. They were getting a bit nervous with these boats going so fast. They knew I had a military background. I knew some of the designers and the boat builders. And I sort of kind of did a throwaway line. I said, well, if you ever need any help, you know, I'm more than happy to help. And the next day they phoned me and says, can you help? And within a few weeks, I was off to San Francisco for 8 weeks, where we trained and tested. And then we went around the world, New York and then Europe. And so, as I said, if you get the opportunity, I think say yes. And anyway, this picture is our home. Matthew will remember this well. These are the boats that we use to chase these boats. There's 200-300s on the back, 600 horsepower, not enough to keep up with the sailing boats. And this was home for many hours on the water. That was me, just as that was my first, I think, experience of sailing. I think in Cornwall, even though I didn't grow up here. So there you go. This was my military training, and I like this photograph. I love this. This is a chap here. I don't think he ever stood up straight ever again. I think this is how he looks forevermore. This is me looking exhausted because I was always tired. This guy's a neurologist somewhere in America now. We were doctors, and the other two guys were the guys who shine lasers on targets and things. So great times. I think it was when I realized that being a doctor is not about being a doctor amongst other doctors. You know, leadership, teamwork is about bringing together skill sets, and you're just a cog in a bigger wheel. And I think the military taught me a lot about teamwork and looking after each other, because that was my home in slightly more interesting times. Military days, you know, strange things. This is a nuclear, biological, chemical warfare course with international crew. And I spent a lot of time in sort of that chemical warfare, counterterrorism world. Very strange, but a lot of fun. And really kind of far flung. I never thought I would end up doing that when I was sitting at medical school, I have to be honest.
Is that just like a lot of toxicology?
Sorry, was that a question?
Was that more on the, well, I guess nuclear warfare would be radiation poisoning, but for biological, was that more looking at infectious diseases, or was that looking at toxins like mustard gas and nerve gas and the
like? Interestingly, a lot of what I learned there is very relevant for COVID now. Huge amount of it is relevant. We spent a lot of time. A certain gentleman called Saddam Hussein we had concerns. He had what's called dirty bombs. I spent a lot of time learning about anthrax and biological warfare. And you know, we probably could to have a whole separate conversation about biological warfare and the issues and how as medics, you know, you tackle that and detect it. And and it very much overlaps with, as I said, a lot of things that have been happening with COVID in terms of, you know, population planning and screening. Here's a little video. So this is us training with the British boat. Just to show you, this is a calm day. And just to show how bumpy Matthew and I had to sit there. We're only doing about 26 knots. It's fast enough. But the British boat, look at that, looks just beautiful and majestic. But there we are bouncing around, trying to look at the radar screens. You know, sometimes there's 6 other countries racing and we're all trying to keep tabs on where all the other countries are. So lots of fun. Because before you know it, look what happened to the United States of America's boat. They're not looking too flash. Now, to be fair, they weren't the only country who capsized. So this is where you, excuse me, I'm just getting a coffee delivered. So pause there. Thank you. So Global Safety Officer for SailGP fundamentally was to look after the safety of these amazing sailors. Most of them are Olympians, professional sailors, they're top of the game. And as you can see, there's some very sharp, pointy bits. these are quite high up, and you can't just say to your medic and your paramedic, go and check this guy, he's got a broken arm or something. The logistics of how do you get someone out of that cockpit without creating an even bigger problem. So this is my my safety teams down here. This is Walker Potts. I think that's a wonderfully American name. He's a former American SEAL Team 6 soldier. A wonderful, wonderful guy, full of energy. And look, he's climbing up. We've already checked everybody. This is him now starting to climb up to get the ropes ready to tip this back up. This is the British boat, so they capsize as well. This is New York, but I don't recognize the background. Does anyone recognize the background? This is off the Hudson River, so I'm sure it is. But anyway, there we go. So that was the British over on this side. So I just want you to start thinking about, if you're the safety officer, look, there's people, I don't know what this guy's doing. I think he's jumping in. He's in a very dangerous position. There's current running. There's other boats around. As you can see, the water's not exactly Caribbean tropical clear. You basically can't see your hand if you're underwater. And this is the Chinese boat in San Francisco. They thought they could try going, I think, underwater for a while. This is them crashing, probably at about 40 knots. Just off to the left here is the Golden Gate, San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, and the problem was that crash cracked the mast. Here's someone up the mast. Can you see my mouse? You can see me move it. Yeah, cool.
Yes.
So if you look carefully, you can see although these are sort of giant, this is like a jumbo jet wing on it stood up, and these giant flaps, but that flap shouldn't be gaping open there. So the mast's cracked, and you can see there's a boat, they call it 69ing. They normally put 2 boats either side, and we had to take this boat down backwards all the way back to the base. It took about 8 hours, because if they turned it round, it would start to sail. These boats are like Formula 1 cars, but if you drop them in the water, they want to move. So these boats are holding it in place because it wants to go off sailing. And of course, if it started to go off sailing, the mast would have come down. So these amazing team. So you check the safety, but then we spent 6-8 hours, I think, going all the way back to the base so we could get this boat back and repair it to race the next day. Types of injuries. So let's do a bit of medicine. So obviously the injury in front of you is a very minor one. I'll come back to that. So when you think about being a global safety officer, there's different aspects other than just the medicine, but you must remember the medicine, because fundamentally that's what you're going to get judged on. So minor injuries, cuts and scrapes, unexpected injuries, things that you wouldn't think about, major trauma. So if those 2 boats were to collide, that's at a collision of maybe 160 kilometers of carbon fiber, six sailors on each boat. It could be really complex. So the mass casualty scenario. And then don't forget, there'd be thousands of spectators at these events, and these boats could whiz off the track and pile into some spectator boats. And think about, again, who takes control? How do you work with all the different agencies? You could imagine in Europe, you get the Italians and the Spanish hot-blooded who want to race in and save the day, but actually create all sorts of problems. I have to take my hat off actually to the American agencies who I really enjoyed working with. But the San Francisco agencies, for example, were completely different to how we worked in New York, and then it was completely different to how we worked in Europe as well. So different sort of philosophies. So the public health. Apologies for my spelling mistake, but there should be an L in there. That wasn't deliberate. But you could. They are sailors, so pubic health is probably quite relevant. But we had a mass gastroenteritis outbreak on the base. So we had like a salmonella, and I think the whole teams went down. But there was diarrhea everywhere. And again, all of a sudden, you're speaking to public health agencies. General practice, you're still going to be a GP. As they get to know you, as those teams get to know you, even though you're not meant to be their doctor, if they've got your trust, guess who they're going to come and see? They're going to come and see you. ask about their mental health, or ask about their dad who's not feeling very well, or ask just, and so you just remember, you're going to be there, you're going to be their GP, and a kind of everything else. So that cut that you see was literally one of the girls who's one of the computer software designers for the boat. She just walked past those fins in the hangar. She just brushed gently against it, and it just sliced her leg open. We move around the world in 40-foot containers, and this becomes my sick bay. As you can see, it's heavily dependent on diving. And again, my military background helped me with this. I was a diving medical officer, and diving, something I'll explain a little bit in a second, a bit more. But so whilst it all looks quite glamorous, most of the time you're sitting in a 40-foot container. We realized the sailors were at risk of getting trapped under the boat. There was a fatality in San Francisco Harbor a few years ago when they were training for the America's Cup. The mast went down, a British sailor got stuck under the mast, and sadly he lost his life. And they felt that possibly, had they been given spare air, which is the same as what military helicopter pilots have if they crash into the sea, these little air cylinders give you somewhere between 20-25 breaths of air. You can imagine if you're panicking, that's not going to last long, but it's enough to give you hopefully time. Now, obviously, that comes therefore with a lot of training, because the crash is you take the impact, let it all settle down, get some air into you, and then work out how you're going to escape, as opposed to panicking like crazy and swimming like crazy and then getting trapped. So we spent a lot of time training the sailors. There's a lot of design, making sure these are safe, and you could imagine there's a lot of maintenance, because these things are not designed to sit in salt water. They're designed to sit in a nice dry fast jet or helicopter. So there's a picture, and just showing you the risk and the danger happens from well before you get in the water. And that was something, again, I learned in the military. You often end up dealing with accidents that you didn't necessarily train for. People walk into things, trip, whatever. So lots of issues there. And again, you're in charge and you've got to work with all of these people. But these boats are quite magnificent, I think. These wings, which are fixed, have to be craned onto the boat every day, taken on and off every day. So this is the back of San Francisco. And you can see it wouldn't take much of a gust of wind for that to be just a nightmare. They get tucked up in bed every night and dealt with, and there's these amazing technicians look after these really high-tech bits of kit. That's the underneath of the Japanese boat. And then again, you can see these foils, and they're like razor blades. So if they're, and this is what one of the girls, as I said, just brushed against it, and next thing her leg split open.
What would you say the majority of injuries are from that you saw? Do you think it's from the sailors pulling muscles, just kind of athletic injuries, or more on the construction side with all of the massive movements of the boats?
Yeah, so construction side, so on the deck, we had the broken ankles, twisted knees, people falling off as they're working on the boats, head injuries, cuts and scrapes, in the normal GP. On the water, these are professional athletes. So we had ruptured biceps, a ruptured quad. We had dislocated fingers, broken fingers, trapped fingers, crushed fingers, had a broken jaw, and probably some concussion and some head injuries. So think of if you there's sort of a concussion a sports assessment that we started to introduce about concussion, even though they wear helmets, but there's huge velocities going on. And yeah, that's a good question, Matthew, because we could talk about that. In San Francisco, there was an incident when a French sailor, and have a think about this. If this was you guys, what would you do? He asks for help. He's in agony. He's in a wetsuit. He's cold because San Francisco water's cold. They want to go racing, but he's clearly injured. He's ruptured his quads tendon. Um, the complexity of that was I'm not the actual doctor on the water. I'm not licensed to be a doctor in the USA. I'm certainly not like, and of course, as you know, the state of California is different to New York. So we would hire local qualified doctors, paramedics, etc. So then it's their call, and then but then the French will want me to be involved, and so it gets there's a lot of diplomacy, but the bottom line is it's not my call. So they get whisked off to hospital. And that was very interesting because that shows you the different philosophies. So we then had a panic phone call from the French team within a few hours because the local hospital in San Francisco wanted to operate on his ruptured quadriceps tendon and fix it. Now whilst I've trained in trauma and orthopedics in UVA, I have sort of the slightly more English, slightly conservative background, and I thought, oh, that seems a bit odd. So they were then conflicted. So the next thing, we got advice from a South African doctor, a Kiwi doctor, a British doctor, all orthopedic surgeons. And guess what? They all say slightly different things. So that confuses the situation even more. And, these teams are well funded. Money is not an option. Billionaires fund these teams. So the next thing, this chap was flown and flown to Switzerland from San Francisco for yet another orthopedic opinion. And the Swiss, who allegedly, knew more about quadriceps than anybody else, said, oh, let it heal, physio. So you get involved in all sorts of situations, and you just got to be careful to understand that internationally there's more than one way to boil an egg. Now, so this is the training. Here's our friend Walker Potts, our superstar American hero. The French moaning about jumping in the water in their lovely French way, and these are some of our medics training them. And even I got to put, so Walker Potts, he loved to, what he would do is training, he would simulate you being trapped underwater. So he's about to jump on top of me and hold me underwater till my air runs out and try and drown me so I come up. And he just loves it. He just loves it.
Can I ask another medical question?
Of course you can.
So water has lots of like nasty stuff in it, right? So I'm guessing if someone gets an injury that punctures the skin and they're in the water, they have to go on some weird prophylaxis. What's like the weirdest pathogen that you've had to worry about as a possible contaminant in those cases?
So staph is your main issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so in the Hudson River in New York, where a boat went over, so our divers jumped in, and there's a picture I'll show you. So we worked with SWAT team medics and the local, ambulance crew, and then they quietly said, if we jump in the water, we jump in a hazmat suit. We jump in full.
Well, yes. So I studied in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in our chemistry lab, we were told about these dangerous, like, cyanobacteria, cytotoxic algal blooms that the water will literally kill you because certain toxins are in really high concentrations that come every few years. So I'm just wondering if you've seen any weird stuff like that.
Yeah. So we haven't really seen, because part of your role is liaison with the local, the mayor's office, or the police department, the fire department, and they will tell you ultimately whether so they're doing the local water checks, the public health, and they'll tell you whether it's safe to go into the water. And of course, I would see the bacteria count. So, for example, sometimes we wouldn't train near where we would dock out and load, because we knew the bacteria count was, you probably could walk across the water. There was so much bacteria in it. And but it's at the Hudson River, they couldn't believe that our divers were going in, because this is the New York Maritime sort of police department. They spend most of the year picking up bodies that sort of have sink down to the bottom. And then when the water temperature in the Hudson gets to a certain temperature in the summer, which is when we were there, they say, oh, this is when all the bodies start popping up to the surface. And so they just
Love the
couldn't
bouquet,
believe.
I'm sure.
Yeah, so they were just, yeah, you can imagine what they thought of us. So it's a good question. Um, um, and I think, yeah, we would, so, you have to be prepared to use a broad spectrum antibiotic like Ciproflox, Cipro. Do you know what coamoxiclav is, which is amoxicillin with clavulanic acid? It's a combination.
Yeah.
So, yeah, things that normally you get frowned upon for using, but you tend to have to be prepared to use. I wouldn't necessarily prophylactically do it, although we sometimes used antibiotic ear drops, but that's from my military days if they were diving in docks in dirty water. So look, this is inside, so there's another bit of spare air, and they're not as comfortable as you think. There's lots of things to hit. It's all carbon fiber. And I just want to let you, there's a lot going on. These are foot pedals. These are pre-programmed maneuvers for, this is a bar which rotates because of the winches. And these wheels, like a little PlayStation, are how they control how the foil sits in the water. So those boats look majestic, but there's an awful lot going on, and there's an awful lot for them to concentrate on. The other thing I want to show you carefully is, you see these little ropes with these little orange tabs. So this is a very important safety design. The sailors are tied to the boat. We designed a special harness that's backwards, because if the harness was in the front, it would get in the way. So the harness clips onto their back, and they can only move across from one side to the other in a predetermined sequence. But these glow in the dark. So in the boats upside down, our divers know that if we're missing sailor number 3, we know that sailor number 3 is somewhere on that rope. And so the divers literally would see that glows in the dark, glows in the water, and we know that we have to go and look for the sailor on that rope line somewhere. So that's a simple, but again, really important feature, because they've only got 20 breaths of air, and then they're going to run out. So yeah, there's a better picture. So sailor number 3, you can see how each sailor's numbered and how they run across. So this is us in the UK. So moving out from the dock where we were based, lots of things to hit. I think this is another video just to show you, just to get you an idea of when we start racing, especially when they're training, how you kind of have to have 360 vision. So that's the British team. And then before you know it, the French team are coming up at us. And these are so those chase boats will have, each chase boat has a diver and a medic in them as well. Show you when things go wrong. So this is one of those videos, Matthew, we're not supposed to show. This is the Australian team. And I might need to play this a few times for you to appreciate it. So this is, can you see the guy sitting in the cockpit at the front? So this guy here is about to move across, they're about to go through maneuver. So this is the skipper, Tom Slingsby. This guy here, an Olympic sailor. This is the front of the cockpit. I want you to see where he ends up. So watch the hyperextension of his back. Shall I play it again? And again, so the risk of spinal injury, you see his head whiplashing. Does anyone want to see that again, or you happy? So spinal injuries, and then the complexity of, let's say he did say, we did have to lie him down, but if we needed to spinally keep his spine secure and safe, it's incredibly, it's not straightforward, is it? You're not sitting in a nice flat concrete ED department. You're bobbing it around on the water. People are wet and cold, and you've got multiple boat transfers before you're going to get back to shore, or you might have to call in a helicopter and winch him out. So things to think about, things to practice. So that's just an overview for if you ever get to become sort of a safety officer. Fundamentally, the most part of my work was in between races, writing the safety plan document and presenting that to, for example, the New York Mayor's office. the fire department, the police department, of which if they don't sign off and feel that you've got a really good, robust plan, they won't let you go sailing. So when you've got, the budget was 750 million US dollars being spent on these boats, and then you're all of a sudden the New York Mayor's office says you can't go sailing because I'm not happy with your safety plan, Dr. Reid. You could imagine the 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 pressure comes on you. So there's a lot of time spent writing this, but fundamentally you want to get in and go and see your stakeholders, the New York Mayor's office, the police, and say, how do we make this plan work for you? So you mustn't just turn up and expect to just do what you like. You've got to adapt your plan to suit the teams that have worked in those harbors for years and years and work alongside them. So yeah, we do a lot of work on the safety in the boats and the harnesses. As I said, we do a lot of protocol training, and then we get to spend money on toys and things. So this is just again showing you that sort of teamwork. So this girl in the front, although she's dressed as a medic, she's actually an FBI SWAT team. We borrowed her because we knew she was going to keep a cool head, and she was a great medic and a great asset. But the whole team was just fantastic. And again, in the weird thing about the Hudson River is you have to have medics from both sides of the river in order to go sailing. So you have different, and again, you've just got to make sure you work as a team. This is our diver, who's English, who's an ex-special forces diver. So he's the guy who goes in the water. They all think he's crazy because he's jumping in the Hudson River. But actually, we had a great team, and everyone knew what they were going to do. So, if we get someone into the boat, it becomes the local jurisdiction. It becomes their remit, and we work alongside them. But you do get to get some really beautiful shots. This is obviously bottom of Manhattan and the Chinese boat coming out of the mist. Right, how are we doing for time, Matthew? Are we all right? Yeah. So a strange thing happened to me.
You mind if I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go Grant.
Whenever you're trying to get like all the police and the EMTs and all that, I mean, do you have a certain budget for that? Do you have to pay cities for their police departments? And like, how do you go about I don't know, letting the city know, this is a legit big event and that we need a lot of people? Like, how's that kind of process work?
You hit a really good point there. So San Francisco held America's Cup event, so they were kind of familiar. They had a lot going on, a lot of big events. And in essence, you have to write the plan. You have to let them know you're bringing your own assets. But if I give you an example, the New York Mayor's office, they saw this as a cash cow. I was in New Zealand, and I used to have sometimes 3-4 hour video conferences in New Zealand with the New York Mayor's office. And you could tell they were just, every phone call, they were saying, I think we need more paramedics. I think we need more fire department. And you can tell I'm having to go back to my manager, and they're writing the check. And there was a little bit of gaming going on. At one point, I had to explain that the Hudson River, if the New York Mayor's Department had their say, there would be more medics on the Hudson River per man than in Iraq or Afghanistan. They knew that Larry Ellison was funding it, and they knew that Larry was going to keep forking out the money because otherwise the race wasn't going to. So yeah, it's a really good question. And again, that's what, as I said, that's where diplomacy comes in. And I think there's a little bit of give and take. You have to be firm, and you have to understand that fundamentally, you don't want the sailors to get injured or die. This is a very dangerous environment, and you have to understand that the New York Police Department are responsible for the public. So you have to understand the dilemma they're in, and there's thousands of people on the water. And
so it's essentially it's like a contract. Like each EMT has a certain hourly cost that you have to rent for, yes. I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So that's right. So and it varied, and it varies. So you could imagine American culture is very risk averse and very there's litigation always on the horizon, so there's a lot of medics involved, and there's a lot of medics who work within very strict parameters. And I really enjoyed, as I said, I really enjoyed working amongst all the teams. They were fantastic. Again, as long as you let them know that, hey, we're here to work as a team. If I turned up and says, hey, we're going to run a race and I've got my own medics, they would have just kicked me off the water, quite rightly. So it was a case, hey, come and see the boats, come and give us some advice. Tell us if you think our safety plan's working. The British were very harbor master, very old fashioned. They want to see the detail. They really want to feel as if they're in charge, that old fashioned harbor master philosophy. And then you get to France and it was like, hey, yeah, go sailing, cool. The French but the problem with that is if something goes wrong, they're going to race in and they're going to take over, and there's going to be no pre-planning. So the documentation, it's the safety plan is it's a 100-page document. It's got modeling, it's got it's got, as you say, it's got the breakdown of who's what, who we're getting for how many hours we're going sailing. So yeah, and interesting, it brings me into this. So I don't know if any of you have managed to see this movie Tenet, but 2 of the boats are in it. So we spent 2 weeks filming for this movie, I think, and our boats are probably in it for about 1.5 minutes. And the director, Christopher Nolan, he joined us in San Francisco, and then the stunt team started to join us in San Francisco and New York, and then we did the filming in Europe. It was meant to be Italy, but we were doing it in the UK, sadly. And I don't know if any of you had any involvement, again, in providing medical services to movies, but this is a whole different ballgame. Warner Brothers just is like a machine. The budget for this movie was $250 million US. And as you could imagine, just this juggernaut of people came who just don't expect you to say no. This is Hollywood. They just bulldoze over everything and talk about lack of diplomacy. But anyway, some interesting times, and I'll take you through it. So yeah, and I suppose that's why I've written diplomacy, understand your role. At the end of the day, I'm just a tiny part, even though I ended up helping to coordinate the stunts and the safety. Fantastic experience for me. I had an amazing time working with the stunt team and the actors. Warner Brothers don't give a stuff about the medics at the bottom unless something goes wrong, and then they're going to sue you. So that's right, know what you're meant to do. This is the stunt team, some of the stunt team. I love the fact that this is Keanu Reeves' stunt double. If you watch John Wick, this guy does all of his job. Every single fight scene in John Wick is by this amazing guy. The guy here does all the wire work for Spider-Man. This is the stunt producer for Spider-Man and Batman, and he does all sorts of the big fight scenes as well. Amazing guy. So we took them through the whole training. Just a really very professional, great fun. Couldn't wish for a nicer bunch of people. Become really good friends. This is just putting them through the train. Look who's there, Walker Potts. Walker Potts is trying to drown the Hollywood team yet again. So this is us. What we would do is we'd stick them underneath the pontoon and try and get them trapped, so they really start freaking out. But there we go. So this is a still from the movie. It was a really stormy day. They never used it, but it would have been the most epic day. But I'll take you straight on. So they turn up, Hollywood turn up with camera boats. And again, all of a sudden, there's a whole different risk profile going on here. Christopher Nolan films in IMAX, so 55 mil. And so all of a sudden, there's boats everywhere. There's a lot of stress on. And of course, they want to stick massive cameras on our boats. So although it's meant to be the beautiful Italian summer, the weather doesn't play ball. And you've got these amazing cameramen putting these cameras on and trying to rig them. The film only lasts 3 minutes. Then they got to do a film change because it's the IMAX film. He likes to film in analog, not digital. This is Andrew Jackson. He's won an Oscar, I think, for one of the movies, I don't know, but this is him pre-planning. So he's looking at a screen trying to get the camera. Now here's the problem. This is our safety boat. So I'm there as the safety. but all of a sudden we're getting hijacked by, you know, people who just going to plow in. At which point do I go, hey guys, bugger off, this is my safety boat? Or do I, you know, let the Oscar-winning movie director sit there? So it's a balancing act, and so you just have to be prepared to make that judgment call and have a bit of give and take. And this is funny. This is still the safety boat, and I laugh because here's one of our paramedics, the local paramedic from the UK, licensed to be a paramedic, Andrew Jackson, Dan Brown, the stunt guy. This is the producer. He's the one who has to work out where all the money's going spent. Camera, and you can see they're just arguing. So they're arguing. That's why he's smiling. And this is one of those classic things. This is the safety boat, but all of a sudden it's been taken over by an argument. A little close up. So we trained every single person who went on those boats, actors, movie, stunt doubles, cameramen, had to go through the same training that our sailors go. Each sailor wears a harness, which ties them to the boat, which, as I said, is great. But if you slip or fall and get trapped, you need to know how to get out of it. Your buoyancy aid, your spare air, 2 knives. So there's a lot of training that has to be done to get people to understand what to do and get their confidence. For sailors, we do it in the ocean. For Hollywood, we did it in the pool. Had to be a bit more gentle. And then the movie director announced that in the key role he wanted, so this is I'm showing you a little bit of secret of the movie now. He decided that the key lady, Elizabeth DeWhiskey, was going to cut the line and throw her husband, hopefully to his death. But the problem was he wanted Elizabeth to sit in this seat, which is the flight controller's seat. We were still going to have to fly and sail these boats. And the actress couldn't do this because the boat's still going along at 40 knots. The stunt double, as amazing as she was, couldn't do this. And we had this amazing, funny moment where Christopher Nolan was like doing exactly what I'm doing, going, he realizes, look, if you want Elizabeth, the leading lady, to be sitting in that seat for that scene, it's just not going to work. And he's like, and then he looked at Rome Kirby, which is the USA skipper, who's a good-looking, all-American Olympian. And he went, can we get you into wardrobe tonight? Rome wasn't too impressed. And my camera's in the way, but I can move. So this is the reality. So Elizabeth, can you see that? Can you all see that picture? So Elizabeth DeWhiskey is the actress in the bottom who is in the movie. The lady on the left is the stunt double, who's meant to have done it. And of course, unknowns to if you watch the movie, the lady is actually Rome, because he ended up putting a wig on, and he was so pissed. He was so pissed. They glued the wig onto his head the night before, and he said, not a fucking word. So now you should all go and watch the movie again and look for Rome. Okay. Let's move on. I took this picture of I've taken pictures of patients all my life. There's a little project. Fundamentally, you're all at medical school. You all want to be doctors and you want to look after people. So I've talked about a lot of fun, but don't. And I suppose this is me being a bit sentimental. It's still about looking after people. This is a Maori. I did a book in New Zealand. Took a photograph of my patients, and again, just I got to go sailing with the French. So, and I think that's enough. I'll take some questions.
What are some medical skills that you think we could use potentially in our everyday lives that you see working on the race? Like, for example, with drowning, I know that whenever I started working on the rescue boat, I was worried about using defibrillators on the boat because I was worried about electricity traveling through the water that was on the boat deck. Do you have any other examples of anything that we could use if we are in a situation where we're on a boat, people fall off the boat, and we become the primary care providers for that situation?
As you probably know, yeah, everything's based on ABCs, isn't it? So, you know, whether it's is advanced trauma life support, ATLS, or ALS, fundamentally, that's what you base, and you know, that works. That keeps, if you starting to get muddled, you know, going back to those ABCs is still fundamentally what I would always rely on. And in those sort of approaches, and even, you know, even if you haven't got an unconscious person, it's still, you still use that ABC to assess, and that you know, that otherwise you can get yourself muddled and get into a pickle. I think the other thing is to practice, and think about things, and build up the practice to be as real as possible. If you just practice in a classroom, and then you jump in a pool, but then the reality is the injuries in San Francisco Harbor, where the water's cold, there's 4 knots of tide running, and so we would practice. You know, we would do drills where we would, and you know, it's easy not to do these drills, and then you suddenly realize how the ABC bit is almost well, it should be the easy bit. The hard bit is understanding your environment. And so wilderness medicine, this sort of extreme, understand your environment, understand your CASEVAC plan. How do you get someone from where you are back to the hospital? How are you going to do it? What's your plan? If you haven't already thought about that before you go in the water, there's a problem. So the pre-planning is the key. And that's when communication comes, and understanding who you're going to talk. 2 or 3 different ways of communication. So we had the radio, we had mobile phone, we had WhatsApp, but I also had a satellite phone. I carried a satellite phone with me everywhere. So we just couldn't afford not to have comms. I would check with the ambulance, I'd check with the hospital, we'd check with the police, we'd double check how we're going to get people. Don't just presume you're going to go to that jetty on the day. There could be a boat parked in the way. Practice your ABCs. Go and do an ATLS course. You know, there's what, I don't know if you've got them in USA, but certainly in New Zealand, in this country, you have what's called in New Zealand they're called Prime, and which is where, if you're in a rural environment, you get to go and work with the ambulance crews and provide that sort of pre-hospital care, or get up on a helicopter type, you know, helicopter emergency medical services, and often go and spend a night or 2 with the ambulance crews. They're more than happy to have you tagging along, and you see how, yeah, just picking someone off who's fallen down some stairs is a lot harder than you think, or getting them downstairs from a bedroom, you know, especially if they're 30 stone or whatever. So picking someone out of the water, if you think they've got a spinal injury, how are you going to do it? So these are, they're not straightforward answers until you practice them. So practice.
I have a question related to that one. So did you have like an emergency kit on you at all times, or were there certain casualties that you were prepared for at any moment? So, you know, for example, a Marine going through southern Afghanistan would be prepared for blast injuries or gunshot wounds. You know, we would have various things on us at all times, prepared for that. What kinds of things were you ready for, or needed to be ready for in that environment?
Yeah, so we probably, because budget was, you know, we were lucky to have such a big budget that we could pretty much get kit we wanted. So we would have, we probably had too much kit, but we had everything from, so I would have a medical kit, and this is where it gets difficult. The correct pathway is we would employ and contract local emergency services to come and provide the emergency care. So they need to use their kit. But the reality of that is we know that often their kit is not good enough for these sort of elite boats. You know, we've thought about some of the more complex things. So we had our own defibs, we had our own splints, we had our own stretchers, we had our own flotation stretchers, we had fluids, we had, you know, EZO drills, we had the basic life-saving drugs, and I suppose we would spend a lot of time thinking about this. But you know, if there was an American sailor, you know, injured, and I felt the local, you know, because Matthew might want to jump in on this as well, because we had to take kind of potluck sometimes on who was going to turn up. And so there's an ethical call. At which point do you jump in and potentially get yourself into medical legal gray area? I've just, how we would word it is to say, I am happy to advise you for anything you wish, but ultimately, you know, you make it very clear. Penetrating injuries, we were worried about that, so we used like some military Israeli field dressings and things, and we had some. And again, the blood loss, you would imagine if in the water, would be rapid and horrific. And then analgesia, so we use Penthrox, which is an inhalation drug. I really like it because you can literally throw it to someone, and I trained all the sailors on how to use it themselves. So as long as you know, one of the worst things to deal with is a conscious person who's screaming in pain because their femur's sticking out their leg and they're trapped in a hull. So get some pain relief on board. It always seems to take a little bit of the heat and strain off things. Oxygen, obviously, you know, bearing in mind with this potential drowning injuries and various types of airways. But again, most of the time I'm trying to keep it simple. I spent a lot of time training the sailors. So at each event, I would take each team, I would spend about an hour with each team, each country, and let them pick a scenario. So they were great. You know, they would pick a scenario, they would pretend to capsize, and I would let them go through it. And I'd say, right, you know, he's got a broken leg or he's unconscious. What are you going to do? And that's how you bring in the medics and stuff. And that's so. So the equipment's important, but you just got to. There was a danger of having too much equipment as well. You know, so understand what sort of equipment you need to, because what I need to do is get that person off the water into an ambulance.
Right.
That's it, isn't it? When you think about it. I'm not there. I'm not setting up a field hospital in the middle of the Hudson River. So,
Right.
although the New York Mayor's office would have liked me to have done that.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It's not. It could be. It's not a nightmare. I think you just got to break it down and understand. And that's what I remember I said right at the start. Ask. I used to ask the local ED department. Go, you know, get into who's in charge of the local ED department. Hey, come and look at my kit. What do you think?
I see.
What we did in the British Special Forces is we had a faculty, and we would invite once a year. We'd invite all the top civilian surgeons and anaesthetists and ED physicians, and we would invite them to the military base and show them the kit. And they'd love it. Obviously, they'd come and this is cool. And then and of course they would initially go, oh, well, we'll put them into a CT scanning machine. Oh, we'll MRI scan them. We'll do this. We'll do that. And we'd say, well, no, you're in the desert or you're in the jungle.
Right.
And so we would continuously adapt and say, and no, you can't have that because the guy's got to carry it. He's got to carry it for 5 days and he's carrying other bits of kit as well. So we would continually refine. So I kind of use that again. You can't just fill your boat up with stuff so much so that you don't know where anything is. I mean, what did I use most of the time? I probably used, tape. You know, there's dislocated fingers and things like that. You know, there's sports injuries, you know, the by the side of the rugby pitch, basic sports injury stuff. You just need to be prepared to handle those.
Thank you.
How do like big events, like, you know, big marathons, big movie productions, how do they hire? I assume they have like a medical director. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a position, but is it a service that you work for, or do they hire you as an individual?
So there's companies. There's some people who make a very good living. You know, so there's a company, and there's normally in the big cities there's one or two medical provider companies to get themselves into a niche. So in New York, there's a couple who will say that, you know, what happens is they get that relationship with the New York Mayor's office. They understand the the paperwork that has to be involved. And then they will go and recruit medics to help work for them. And then you're right, they normally have a medical director, and that's how the insurance works. Ultimately, the medical director gets the insurance for the event. And then they employ whoever they see fit. Movie sets is normally, when you watch the credits, there's always a medic somewhere in the credit. They're normally nurse based. But as I said, if you get involved in the more stunt based things, they may bring on. So when Christopher Nolan wanted to use the boats, Christopher Nolan, the movie director, actually requested that the SailGP medical team was part of what he wanted. So that was great, because but he realized that having a nurse, no disrespect to the nurse, but the nurses are normally used to the actors coming because they've got a cough or a cold, or they've got a, they're not used to necessarily dealing with boats with a collision speed of in excess of 100 kilometers an hour. So I think you'll find that for like Formula One, sort of IndyCar, there'll be similar sort of setups, and and some are good and some are bad. I know that some people say your job is to make sure those people don't go anywhere near the injury if there is one. And that's why I relied on a lot of military contacts. We as I said, I find the medics who've been in a military setting tend to have a little bit more level-headed. They're better at working with a team, and they're more adaptive. Because if you just go by the rule book, sometimes you're going to get yourself very quickly. There's a lot of things we're asking people to do which they've probably not trained for at medical school or nursing school.
Do you guys have any last questions for Dr. Reid?
Just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this. It's very, very interesting and unique.
No,
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I just think use your medical degree to go and do cool things. If you get the opportunity, go and do it. Have some fun, because you're all capable. The skills you learn at medical school is about it's communication. It's taking a history is a real important skill set that you can use to communicate in a non-medical environment. So yeah, thanks. I hope that was useful, guys. Yeah, nice to talk to you. I wish I was there.
Yeah, we wish we could see you in person too. Thank you for coming, everybody, and I'll post a recording in case you guys want to see this again. Yeah, hope you guys are all having a good spring break.
All right, take care, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for showing up, Dr. Reid. I think people really